So in 2024, Canada basically rewrote the rulebook for who gets to move there. It's a huge deal. So in this explainer, we're going to break down their pretty high-tech immigration system and figure out what this big shakeup really means for skilled people all over the world.
I mean, think about it. How does a country actually choose its future citizens? For a long time, it was basically just a queue, first come, first served. But Canada realized, hey, there's got to be a smarter way to do this. A way to find people who are not just waiting, but are actually set up to succeed in the Canadian economy. And that thought, well, that's what led to a system that feels a lot more like a high-stakes competition.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into what I'm calling Canada's high-score immigration game. Then, we'll look at how you actually get to number 1. After that, we'll unpack the new VIP list. This is the big change. We'll see who actually got invited in 2024, and finally, what this all means for Canada's talent pool.
Okay, let's start with the basics. What even is Express Entry, and why did Canada decide to build this whole system in the first place?
So the easiest way to think about Express Entry is like this. It's a giant digital waiting room for skilled immigrants. Before 2015, trying to move to Canada was a mess of paperwork. It was literally a first-in, first-out line, which you can imagine created these insane backlogs. Plus, there was no real guarantee that the person at the front of that line was the right fit for Canada's economy. Express Entry completely flipped the script. It created this dynamic pool of candidates who've all said, hey, pick me. It's faster, way more efficient, and, this is the key part, a lot more selective.
So how do you actually get through the system? It's pretty much a 4-step process. First, you put your hand up by submitting a profile online. If you check all the basic boxes for a skilled immigration program, congrats, you're officially in the pool. Now, step 3 is where things get really interesting and competitive. You're given a score and ranked against every single other person in that pool. And then, the final step, Canada holds these regular draws. And if you're one of the highest-ranking people, you get that golden ticket, an official invitation to apply to become a permanent resident.
Right, so you're in the pool with thousands of other hopefuls. How does Canada actually pick who gets invited? Well, it all boils down to one thing, a system designed to predict who's going to succeed. And it's all about the points. And I mean, it's literally a points game. Your whole life, pretty much, your age, your education, your work experience, it all gets crunched down into one single number. That's your Comprehensive Ranking System score, or CRS score for short. And believe me, in this system, every single point matters. It can be the one thing that separates you from getting that invitation or just staying in the pool.
So what are these points based on? Well, they're based on what the government calls human capital factors. That's just a fancy way of saying they're the things that predict you'll do well financially. So you get points for stuff like your age, right? Being younger means more years to contribute to the workforce. Your level of education, how well you speak English or French, and of course, your work experience, both inside and outside of Canada. Even things about your spouse or partner can get you points.
The whole system is out of a maximum of 1,200 points. The first half, 600 points, comes from all those core things we just talked about, your age, education, and so on. But the other 600 points, those are additional points. And this is where you can get a serious advantage. Things like, for example, getting a nomination from a Canadian province. That alone is a massive boost that practically guarantees you'll get an invitation.
And for years, that was it. That was the whole game. Just get the highest CRS score you possibly could. End of story. But then, 2024 happened, and the rules of the game totally changed. All of a sudden, just having the highest score wasn't the only way to win.
And this slide really shows you the heart of the change. You still have what are called general rounds, where it's a total free-for-all, highest score gets the prize. But now, they've added category-based rounds. This means Canada can say, you know what? This month, we really need healthcare workers. And they can invite the top-scoring doctors or nurses, even if their overall score is lower than, say, a programmer in the general pool. It's a huge shift from picking the best overall candidate to picking the best fit candidate for what Canada needs right now. So what jobs made it onto this new VIP list in 2024? Well, the government laid out 6 specific categories. The first one was huge, strong French language skills. This was a big push to support French-speaking communities across Canada. The other 5 were all about specific job sectors where Canada's facing major shortages. We're talking healthcare, STEM fields, the skilled trades, transportation, and even agriculture.
Okay, so theory is one thing, but what actually happened? Did this new system really change who got an invitation to move to Canada? Well, the numbers are in, and the data from the government's own report tells a really interesting story.
Yeah, and the data shows this wasn't some small experiment. Not at all. These new category-based selections accounted for a whopping 42,475 invitations. That's 43% of all invitations sent out in 2024. So, almost overnight, this targeted approach went from being an idea to being a core part of how Canada picks its immigrants.
And when you break down who got those category-based invites, one thing just jumps right out at you. French language proficiency, it just completely dominated. Out of all those targeted invitations, more than half, we're talking 23,000 people, were invited because of their French skills. Healthcare was the next biggest, but it was a distant second. This shows you exactly where the government's priorities were.
And this new focus really shook up the list of top invited jobs. You can see here tech jobs like software engineers and developers, which were huge in 2023, actually saw their numbers drop in 2024. They're still high for sure, but look what popped up into the number 2 spot. Food service supervisors. That's a huge shift, and it probably reflects those real-world labor shortages we hear about. It's a clear signal that the system isn't just a pipeline for the tech industry anymore.
The impact on the source countries was just as dramatic. India is still number 1 by a long shot, but check out who's number 2. Cameroon. The number of invitations sent to people from Cameroon absolutely skyrocketed in 2024. They jumped ahead of so many other countries, and it's almost entirely because of that huge push for French speakers. It's a perfect example of how these categories are reshaping Canada's immigration landscape.
All right, so let's zoom out and look at the big picture here. We've gone through the old system, the big 2024 shakeup, and the data. So what does all this really mean for Canada and for anyone dreaming of moving there?
Well, the main takeaway is this. The whole philosophy has changed. Canada is moving away from just picking the best candidates on paper, the ones with the highest scores, and instead it's strategically picking the best fit candidates. Express Entry has become less of a simple ranking system and more of an active, surgical recruitment tool for the entire Canadian economy.
And this all leads to a really big question, one that Canada is going to be wrestling with. On the one hand, targeting specific jobs seems incredibly smart, right? You're building a more resilient economy by filling the gaps you have right now. But on the other hand, are you just chasing today's trends? Is there a risk that you might miss out on the next great innovator simply because their job isn't on this year's hot list? It's a fascinating debate, and honestly, it's just getting started.